What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Geigenomics. Disclaimer for this episode. If you're a fan of this show, don't feel like you need to listen to every episode. This show is not for everyone, and this episode in particularly is not for everyone. This is not for Let me just say that this has taken me years and a roller coaster of emotions and thinking to come up with the ideas I'm about to share. So it's not for everyone. And if you have a weak stomach or don't like some of the more philosophical, heavier things about life, then this is not for you. And that's okay. But if you're choosing to stick around and listen, what I'm going to be discussing is death. And as morbid as that may seem, I think the importance of understanding and discussing and thinking about death is that I guess considering death in a philosophical sense allows the opportunity for a person to have a more appreciative perspective on life, and that's what I'm interested in, is enjoying life. One thing, a philosophical thing that I've thought of that I don't always apply to my life is that there's never a reason to get upset about anything in the world, and I think you can do this if you just compare this circumstance or situation to much more worse things that could happen in life. And to take it to the logical extreme, you can see that your situation really may not be that bad or as frustrating as you know, reactionally, like the reaction that could have sparked your anger or frustration. But anyways, when it comes to death, the way I look at it is I try to, okay, so this is what I've been thinking of. I've been thinking of separating death into two categories: product and byproduct. And the product is obviously, in a process, a chain of events leads to a death. But I think of it more as an individual's own chain of events. Whereas the byproduct resulting in death is when you have other people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, create a chain of events that results in some death of people. So people dying. And the examples we can use for this byproduct of death is, murder, war, even accidents. Think about car accidents. So these types of death that are a result of other people's actions, I consider to be a byproduct process of death. And with the product of death, I think of this as like the natural, someone dying of old age, someone dying of let's say maybe direct. So this would include suicide. You can think of seppuku. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Where that was the Japanese tradition of restoring honor to someone's family, I believe, where they would, I think it literally translate to belly cutting, where they would stab themselves in the stomach, and this was a ritual. It was a suicidal ritual, but it was done by oneself to oneself. So this is a product of death. It came by one's own hands and actions. So it in this way I would define it as a product and not a byproduct of other people's actions. Um, so I guess the question is, um, why not why necessarily, but what is so important about discussing death that that this is why I'm doing it right now. Well, to relate it to economics and philosophy, this is part of the reason why I'm an anarchist per se, is the way I look at voting. If you vote for a president or someone who bombs another country and murders someone else, then that's there's blood on that specific politician's hands, but indirectly, the people around him, the cabinet. Think of like Stalin, when he would murder his own people living in the Soviet Union. He would have his staff members also sign the documents that were the orders for mass executions. So this way, they would all be guilty by association. So they couldn't, pin Stalin as the main dude who's responsible for all these murders. No. It was a group thing, the leaders of the Soviet Union. And so this is why, murder at the individual level, think of like a thievery gone wrong situation where it results in a murder. This, obviously was a it was an attack on someone else, resulting in someone dying. And then, just think of war. Like, that's the intention of war, is to murder other people. And so you get into this interesting paradox where you say, oh, we need the state to protect us from war, but you also need a state to go to war. So, I mean, it's this is like, what if we didn't have states, then war couldn't occur at the level that it does. I mean, there's a quote by some economist or someone who says war is the lifeblood to the state. In order for them to have a justified existence, they need war. And this is why you have, our current United States government always making up these wars. We need to go to Vietnam and have a war there. We need to go to the Middle East for inserting democracy, and you start a war there that we're still in. You have a war on a virus, X, Y, and Z, and I don't like war. I mean, I think that it's 2021. Bombs are not cool. They're kind of, more insulting than any microaggression you can think of. So now going into the product side of death, Mises considered death as resignation, and he considered suicide as radical resignation. And this concept of suicide is very, very interesting because there's this book called Promise Me You'll Shoot Yourself, and it's about how after World War II in Germany, in East Germany, specifically in this town called Demmin, which was like very, very East Germany, the people living in this town of Demmin and the surrounding towns in East Germany were aware of the Soviet army invading from Poland into Germany. And what they were hearing was awful stories. They knew for a fact that the Soviets would come in, they would just burn towns to the ground, murder people, rape people. They heard stories that the Soviets were taking the Germans, throwing them in like human-sized grinders. So this was an awful thing. And what happened in Demmin was a epidemic. It was a mass suicide situation, because if you just look at the German history, they started with the Bismarcks. They were the leading country in the 19th century, and then going into the early 20th century, in the Weimar Republic, they were just, leaders in many different fields, music, arts, thinking, philosophy, so many different aspects. They were the top country. And then they have this hyperinflation. After World War One, they got humiliated in World War One. They had to, deal with the Treaty of Versailles. They were humiliated. Hitler came along and gave these people hope. He was a myth to them. He was poor. He was in the army. He was one of them. He was praised, and he also was able, through his government system to create a lot of employment for people. And people were unemployed previously, but in the 1920s into the 1930s, and he really brought this nationalist pride and gave, obviously groups of people for the Germans to point their fingers and be angry at. But he was regarded as a myth. He was so highly revered by the German people that they considered the 1930s up until 1938 the happiest years of their life and for Germany, and it's praise Hitler. I mean, this dude was the Pope to these people, and then he got them into some wars, and throughout World War II, a lot of Germans thought that victory was inevitable. They did not even consider losing. We're Germany. We're the National Socialists. We are, elite. Losing is not an option. So when Germany lost the war, they conceded, Hitler committed suicide. People lost their shit in Demmin, and it was considered an epidemic. And the suicides that these German people would do was there was a lot of gas at that time, so it was a Cyclone B. So they would get these cyanide tablets, and that was from doctors. Doctors were just handing this out. If they didn't have that, they would use a gun. If they didn't have a gun, they would hang themselves. If they couldn't hang themselves, they would drown themselves. There was many rivers in East Germany, and it wasn't what we think it is. It was family suicides. It was, so many stories of mothers taking care of, a couple children, hearing that the Soviets are invading, and they had to drown their own children in rivers, and then they would drown themselves. And some mothers who didn't have the strength to drown themselves lived the rest of their life with the shame that they killed their own children. And it was really some dark shit. I mean, the title of the book comes from a letter written by one of the German officers to his daughter saying, if the Soviets come, promise me you'll shoot yourself. And it's pretty remarkable what happened. But this concept of suicide is such an interesting concept because before that, I want to do have a little digression. I practice jujitsu, and in jujitsu, it's the martial art of getting someone to submit to you. So this isn't through, calling someone a mean name or submitting them in a game of chess, as in checkmate per se, and it's not punching someone. There's no striking. It's grappling, but the submissions come through joint locks and strangles. And the strangles are very philosophically interesting because if you put someone in a cinched up tight triangle choke, this is where, the person being strangled has their arm next to their head, and it's in the opponent's. The opponent is making essentially a triangle shape with their legs, so it's a figure four looking thing. And when you lock up a triangle and execute it, the hamstring and calf is connected to the person's neck. And on your neck, on the sides, there's two arteries. Those are called the carotid arteries. those send the majority of the blood from the body to the brain. And when that flow of blood is disconnected, or if it's not necessarily disconnected, but if it's reduced by pressure that comes from a choke, it takes not too long to feel lightheaded. It takes not too long. Like a rear naked choke can take up to 20 seconds to put someone, out unconscious. With a tight triangle choke, it can take up like a couple seconds. It can take 2, 3, up to 5 seconds. It's very quick because it's very tight. You're using someone's legs to wrap around someone's neck, essentially, and cut off that blood flow. So practicing jiu-jitsu, you can feel like, when you get into a tight triangle choke, that you need to tap. Tapping is signaling to your partner or your opponent that, hey, I'm giving up. I am submitting to you. I cannot do anything defensively to help this. And so, if you feel those moments where you're losing that blood to your brain, you can tap. Now, some people don't tap, and if you don't tap and that choke continues, you will be put to sleep, which is meaning that the blood is not getting to your brain. Your brain is shutting off. Now, it takes about 2 to 3 minutes for a choke to be continued, where there's no blood going to your brain, in order for that person to die. So essentially, in jiu-jitsu, you're feeling you're playing with your own morality, in a sense, that you are feeling how vulnerable we are as humans to death and dying. And I think what's just again important is to know that we have to consider death philosophically, because it's inevitable. It's coming to each person. And if you ever seen Kung Fu Panda, when Master Oogway, he's like the Kung Fu master, and he's talking to Master Shifu, and Master Oogway, he says, "My time has come," and he disappears off a cliff and bursts into like a bunch of flowers, and it's sad, but he passed away, essentially, but he was at peace with it. And I think this ability to pass away in peace is something very valuable, and it's recognizing the time, not the days necessarily, but just that at any moment you can be a byproduct in certain situations. And byproduct is still part of the product of death. So at some point, that's the only thing inevitable for everyone's future is death. And I don't mean to say this to be, a pessimist or a cynic or anything of this sort, but just to embrace it, I guess, to maybe help it be less scary. And I don't want to get into the metaphysics of after death, but just accepting the fact that death is inevitable. I find this very interesting, and I don't want it to be, as morbid as we make it. Just something to be thought of and perspectivized on. And I will leave with the quote from the Romanian writer Emil Cioran, that without the idea of suicide, I would have surely killed myself. Thank you. Be safe. Be good. Peace.